Okay, thank you for allowing me to present on this webinar. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about careers in organic and sustainable ag, but I thought I would start a little bit about some background, a little bit about myself, some things I've done, and really what organic agriculture is about for some of you that might not know what that might mean, and then talk a little bit about some of the projects that we're doing that might shape your thinking on some different careers based on what my students have been doing, and then give you a little insight on some careers or choices that people might think about in this area when looking at organic and sustainable ag. So a little bit about me. So I'm from a small town in Minnesota. Grew up there with Jersey cows. This is me long ago. I got my bachelor's degree in animal and plant systems from the University of Minnesota. So that maybe allowed me to really think about integration or relationships between animals and plants instead of just trying to focus on one thing. And then I got my MS and PhD in animal breeding, and I worked with Dr. Les Hansen at the University of Minnesota, and we looked at crossbreeding herds in California as well as in Minnesota. So that's really where I got exposed to organic production. Some of the herds that we worked with were grazing-based herds, and one had transitioned to organic production while we were working on that study, and was milking 900 organic cows in Central Valley of California. So that really got my interest in organic and grazing agriculture. And then I was hired as an assistant professor at University of Minnesota at the West Central Research and Outreach Center, and I'll talk more about that later. And then I'm an associate professor where I work in research and extension in organics and grazing-based research. But really what sort of shaped a lot of the things that I've done in the past and really looking is, I would urge certainly graduate students, and I've urged my graduate students a little bit to experience other parts of the world and country. And I think that helps change your thoughts, especially to organic agriculture. I think some people might get confused about what organics is and are thinking it's just low production and doesn't really mean anything. But really, there's a growing movement out there, and it really helped by going to some of these countries to be able to see what organic agriculture really is and what grazing-based research is, and really learn from other places in the country and the world. So I think that being able to experience those as a graduate student was immensely important into a lot of my decisions and career choices. So I would urge people to do that if you can find the ways. And really, it's still part of my everyday world. So I was just in Denmark last 2 weeks, where I was visiting some organic dairy herds. This is me and Morten Cargo. He's a researcher at Aarhus University. We are visiting an organic Jersey dairy here in Denmark. So organics is a little bit different in Europe, but relatively the same. Winter time, so the cows are in the barn there. And I also had a chance to visit. This is Naturmælk, which means nature milk in Danish. And this is an organic processor that I visited last week. Organics is growing in the European countries, and a lot of people are very interested in it, and they're developing many different products. This particular processor, albeit is not the largest processor of organics in Denmark, but they have about 40 farms that they work with, so quite a few, and most of their market is in Copenhagen, so there are people willing to purchase these products, but it's worked out very well for them. And being able to learn in other parts of the country, my world, my job has given me the opportunity to learn about organics in many different facets of the world, which can help in our United States here as well. So what what is organic production? So I'll give you a little background about really what it means for those of you that might not quite understand or have questions about it. Really, it's for dairy animals, you have to be certified by an organic processing facility or inspection agency to be able to sell your milk or animals as organic. So there's a lot of extensive paperwork that that happens through this and being able to do that. It takes about 1 year to certify a herd organic, but the feed must be 100% organic that has to be fed to them. So the land must be 3 years organic before you can really feed that to cows. So there's this transition period that happens. So on the land, you're not allowed to use synthetic fertilizers or anhydrous ammonia or chemical herbicides, things like that. There's some different healthcare requirements that come along with antibiotic use and hormones, so they're not allowed in organics. We don't allow any sort of antibiotics with those animals. Now, I should say, if an animal is getting sick and you must treat them, you have to treat them. You cannot sacrifice the welfare of the animal, but you should treat them to be able to improve them to health, but they cannot go back into the organic herd after that. Which is different from Europe. So Europe, you can allow antibiotics in an organic herd and wait maybe double the withdrawal time, and then she can go back into the system, into the organic herd. In the US, that would not be allowed. We also have a pasture mandate, so you have to get 30% of their dry matter intake from pasture, and the grazing season must be 120 days. There's a lot of herds, organic herds in the United States, which are much greater than 30% dry matter intake. I work a lot with the Organic Valley Co-op in my research and extension programs, and most of their farmers are around 50 to 60%. So a lot of these farms are getting far more pasture. So working with pasture herds is pretty important when looking at organic and sustainable ag. The housing must be outside. They must be freedom of movement. You have to use a lot of records, like I said before. You have to maintain them on feed and health, which we should be doing in the conventional world as well. I think it's just good practice. And prevention is certainly a key. We can use vaccines, so we do use a lot of vaccines, at least in our herd, to be able to prevent some of those diseases from happening. A few of the things I said before, lots of conservation practices from soil and water, being able to apply those to the land, having the animals to exhibit their natural behavior is certainly one of the important aspects of that, and really trying to look at it from a holistic standpoint. I think sometimes we get stuck into wanting to research or do the same thing for many, many years, and I think looking at a holistic approach here is pretty important to being able to really function in a career in organic and sustainable ag. So a few things here. So this is our herd of cows at our research center out on pasture in the summer, and so animals must be fed organically for 1 year prior to the production of milk. And like I said before, they cannot be rotated between organic and non-organic production. Once they're in an organic herd, they stay there, and if they are treated, they must leave. And they must have access to the outdoors. So they have to be outside all of the time, which does create challenges with heat stress and many things like that. But they are outside on pasture, and even our baby calves are outside in the winter time, and which can happen. And having access to the outdoors sometimes means this, which can be pretty snowy in the upper Midwest this year, and our cows are outdoors in the elements, but we do take care of them and provide shelter, but they do pretty good outside like this. A few things about organics and non-organic dairies that I've worked with in Minnesota. Typically, organic herds are smaller. In Minnesota, where this data is from, the average number of cows is about 112, so a little bit maybe larger than the state average, but there's a wide range. You know, some of the organic herds are 20 cows, and some herds that I've worked with can be 300 to 400 cows. So there's quite a few range, which you see the non-organic or conventional herds in our state average about 230 cows. So maybe about a little bit smaller herd sizes that you work with in an organic situation. The production is a little bit less, so this is about 4,000 kilos. So they do have less production, so 15,000 pounds of milk. They have lower death rate and less call rate. Sorry about the numbers there. This is in euros. I took that from my presentation that I just presented, but it's very close to what it would be in dollars. But you can see that the feed cost is much lower, so being able to work with these farmers to help lower their cost of production, they get a higher milk price, and their net return is much greater. So it is quite profitable to be an organic herd here, and being able to work with the farmers to be able to improve their profitability is probably the most important aspect. So a little bit about our research herd and what we do here for organics that really might shape some of the career choices that we have, and really talks about some of the aspects that you can do in organic and sustainable, and it's not just one thing. So I'm a faculty member at our research center, so we are in western Minnesota, where the cow is looking at us, so in the western part, and my colleagues are in Minneapolis and St. Paul, so 3 hours away. But we have a facility here where we have a kind of a split herd. It's a conventional dairy herd, not necessarily conventional in the strictest standards. There's no freestall barn. It's kind of a compost barn in the winter and a loafing shed in the summer, or they can be out on this dry lot. And then we have our organic herd, which is outdoors and grazes in the summertime. But really, this is typical Midwestern or northern part of the United States. What happens? Grazing season is May to October, November. Feed very little grain. A lot of farms are going that way. I've talked to quite a few nutritionists that work with organic herds, and that can be a challenge working with them, trying to balance pasture with TMR supplementation. So there is definitely a need for nutritionists to work with these herds, and it's not, sometimes the nutrition programs that we learn about in our academic coursework don't really work with pasture-based, because it's kind of hard to balance a ration when you include pasture because of high proteins and lots of different things involved in that. In the winter, we feed just a regular TMR like we would any other herd, with corn silage, haylage, corn, soybean meal. So it's very similar to a conventional type dairy. If you look at our herds, so there's quite a bit of difference between, say, organic and a conventional. And this is obviously not typical conventional herd either, but more of a low input production system. But on average, if you think about organic herds, most of them are around 40 pounds of milk, which we are about at, a little over 4% fat, high protein, a milk price that's quite good. $30 a hundredweight right now, and our conventional herd, which is about 55 pounds of milk. So I look more at a profitability standpoint, and don't necessarily need 90 pounds of milk to be able to do that. And you can see the facts, what's happening there with our herd and many different breeds, which I'll show you here. So there's when you work with organic herds, a lot of them have Holstein, but there are many of them that are using lots of different breeds. So trying to work with them and looking at their breeding program can be quite important, and we're trying to do that at our research center based on a lot of input that we got working with farmers and looking at many different breeds for organic production, because the thought and working with farmers is that the Holstein does not do well on grass. So we're trying to explore some of those opportunities to be able to really work with farmers from a standpoint to help improve their operations. And these are some of the cows that me and my graduate students, we took pictures of this summer. These are cows at our research station. You can see the wide variety that we use in our herd. So this is typical what you get when working with organic herds or organic, even organic production. There's many different variables in breeds, and some have Holstein in the upper right-hand corner, but there's lots of color and in a lot of these herds, so it can be quite different. Like I said before, many organic herds have to have lots of pasture and grazing herds. So there's really a thought process that comes to working with these herds, and it's very different. So working with pasture and grass is very different from a nutritional standpoint than just feeding it all on a TMR. So it takes a different thought process. Weather changes daily, so being able to work with pasture is a very important aspect in these, and being able to understand pasture-based production is very important to working with organic and sustainable ag production systems. This is our research center, so we have lots of pasture to be able to work with these herds. An interesting fact about milk price in these situations is, so this is our dairy. The milk price is variable between our two herds over the last 5 years, and organic is good. You know, in 2016 we had $40 hundredweight, and today we're just a little over 30, whereas conventional is between that 15 to 20 range. So being able to understand where the milk price is and how that relates to production aspects is quite important in these production systems. A little bit about what can be done from an organic standpoint. I think that there's many opportunities. You know, it's not just one, and actually they can be very similar to what you would work with in a conventional dairy type career. So you can, you know, lots of different things, but there are some that are different. You know, working with supplementation strategies is important. Being able to work as a nutritionist, you know, there's a very good need for nutritionists to work with these herds. A lot of herds might feel left out that they don't get necessarily the service, but there is an opportunity to work from a nutritional standpoint based on these. And you might be a good, that might be a good marketing point for finding a job into the future, is if you understand a little bit about organic and grazing-based research, because there's not as many people out there that have those, and a nutrition company certainly looks for people that have some of those differences and being able to work with some of those farmers. You're looking at pasture forage quality is important. Like I said, outwintering, so cows out in the snow. Calves are a very important part, so understanding calf nutrition and calf-related diseases is important. Genetics. A lot of things are used with precision technologies, so looking at activity systems that I'll show you about. So fly management, so there's a lot of different things. So flies can be a problem, not more of a problem in organic dairies, and really talking about some energy efficiency. So like I said before, it's not necessarily focused on one thing. You know, when you think about organics, you're looking at the whole system and how it relates to calves and cows and genetics and reproduction and health, and really looking at the environment is really being able to think about things in a different way than maybe what we've been taught or showed before. So that can be really important. So some of the things that I see growing in the organic and sustainable ag world for careers are being able to work with technologies with cows on pasture. So this is one of the systems that we have been working with here at our research center, being able to look at real-time location of cows, health of cows on pasture, and being able to look at reproduction. So somebody that can understand and work with these technologies and all of the data that they provide can be very important. And they are growing, and lots of farmers are certainly interested in looking at those aspects of it as well. And really, calves are important. I think calves, a lot of farmers that I've worked with, and some are calf rearing can be very challenging. They have lots of issues, and so we've been exploring some new different ways, but you can incorporate technology into those. So being able to understand how to do all these things, but being able to do them from an organic standpoint is one thing that I think is important in looking at those different aspects and being able to work with those, because it's not the same. It's not the same feeding an organic calf as what you do conventionally. So there is a milk replacer, and we had a student look at that, and maybe it doesn't quite work out. So you have to be able to think about those different choices and understanding what organics is before we can just put in a feeder and start feeding milk replacer like it might happen in the conventional world. So there's a lot of thought process that goes behind that. In the picture, you'll notice in the back there's a garage door, so calves need to go outside, and can you do that in an auto feeder system? So you have to be able to think about things a little bit differently when being able to work with this. And there's also an environmental aspect to organic and sustainable production that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, and we're trying to look at different energy-related things with solar vehicles and actually looking at energy efficiency things with our cows. So this is a picture of our cows and some research projects that we're going to be working on, looking at solar shading of cows and being able to do some aspects related to animal health and welfare of cows on pasture and trying to incorporate energy. So in the end, we do a lot of different things related to grazing. I think these are kind of the things that I see as the future of organic and sustainable agriculture, is focusing on grazing. Obviously, genetics, precision technology are very important for people looking at careers. Renewable energy is only going to keep growing. So being able to understand those aspects related to farms, and really education and outreach are important as well. And these are all of the things that we're trying to prepare for in the future and prepare future leaders. So a little bit, some of the research projects that we've done. So I think it sort of bodes well that we can do many things related to organic dairy research. So there's lots of there's research dollars available to be able to do organic research and being able to work with farmers. So that's probably the number one thing, is the research that we do has to be very applicable to farmers. So being able to understand farming and work with farmers is very important to doing these research projects. And it's very applied research. There is some basic stuff that you can do, but really in the end it has to be applicable to farmers. So you can notice a lot of the different things that we've done, looking at fly traps. So this is a cow vacuum that we've looked at, looking at different udder health and dry cow strategies. So animal health is a very important thing. Being able to understand soils. So soils are very important in the organic production world. So being able to understand a little bit about land and soil fertility and those is important. And I had one class as an undergraduate about soils, but I'm probably lacking a little bit in my soil knowledge again, and that is important in sustainable agriculture, is being able to understand soils and working with those, because it does affect cows as well. And some of the other projects that we can work with, managing animal health. So animal health and grazing dairies is very important. So there's lots of opportunities there for looking at health of cows, working with companies that deal with health of grazing animals, and even veterinarians. Veterinarians are are essential in that, some organic herds claim that they don't have to use a veterinarian, but it can be important aspect to understanding animal health and the health regulations that come along with using an organic system. So it's understanding animal health and how to treat animals without antibiotics can be a challenge, but it can be exciting as well. Genomic testing. So genomics is growing in the conventional world. We're also doing some of that work here in cooperating farms with some colleagues at Penn State University that are doing that on organic herds. And you can look at alternative therapies for some of the diseases that we find in conventional herds as well. And of course, like I said at the bottom, extension and outreach is number one, being able to work with some of these farmers. Now, we've also done lots of aspects. Food safety and carcasses is growing. So organic beef is growing in the United States, and there's a need for food safety aspects of organic production, as well as trying to improve carcass characteristics for the organic beef market. So we've done some studies here looking at carcass characteristics of organic beef and how to improve that aspect as well. So a little bit about my students, allow me to brag a little bit about them and what they're doing, and you can see a little bit about some of the aspects that they will be working on that might be pertinent to some of the things that we see. So this is all of our my graduate students and some undergraduates that worked with us this summer and taking some cow pictures. So this is Glenda Pereira. She's also on the GSD board. As a PhD student, so for her master's, she looked at cow manager and organic and grazing herds. So she, we were interested in precision technologies and how they work in a grazing-based herd. We were getting, questions from farmers about how they work. So we actually looked at them and saw that you could use those technologies for grazing in organic herds. And she's been exploring some of that, and also looking at breeding programs for these organic herds as well. And Hannah Phillips, Hannah's also PhD student and has been looking at different things related to animal health aspects. And she's been looking at using tinctures, so looking at different alternatives for disbudding. So you can't, looking at different methods for organic dairy calves to look at pain mitigation. So she's been exploring some of that, looking from an animal health perspective, and also been exploring some poultry welfare and use it to control flies in organic dairies. So it's been an interesting aspect there, and really looking at some statistical analysis of working with some of this organic data and being able to look at alternative health practices to be able to do that. So it's been interesting working with some of those different relationships related to animal health. And then master student Kirsten Sharpe, she's been looking at renewable energy technologies for grazing dairies, so that's been quite important. And she's also been working with calves and going to be working with shade, so some of the solar shade stuff for organic calves, and really working with automatic calf feeders and organic milk replacers. So there's lots of different nutritional aspects and environmental aspects that she's been working on. And then my last one has been working as a master student, Eric Kodak. There he is, likes to judge dairy shows. He is co-advised with Les Hansen and myself, and he's looking at lactation curves more from a genetic standpoint for Holsteins and crossbred cattle. So a little bit about careers. What about some careers that might be available in sustainable and organic ag? So there's quite a few academic jobs that are available. And I think from a faculty member standpoint, there's a few of us. Myself, my title is organic dairy production systems is what my field is. But I think you can work on organics even if you're in a nutritional based faculty position. You can work with grazing herds. It doesn't necessarily have to focus on one thing. You can explore many of those different aspects from that to be able to do that. I think it's really about thinking outside of the box and how to work with different people to be able to do that. There's many jobs related to research technicians and working on some of these projects in organic ag, and it's not necessarily focused on animal science. So, I work with colleagues in agronomy that are studying organics, in horticulture, and many different fields. So, and starting some new collaborations looking at big data from organic type systems and looking at drones and a lot of sensors. So being able to be a systems thinker when you're working in the organic field is very important. I think sometimes we forget about that, but being able to analyze the whole system. There's many different jobs I think about Organic Valley because I work closely with them, and our herd is an Organic Valley dairy. There's many jobs from field staff to research involved in that, to food safety, to food innovation. Food systems are a big important thing. There's a lot of people interested in food, and there's many jobs related to organics and trying to improve the food and health quality of that organic food. And being able to do that. There's a lot of jobs in marketing, working in marketing with these companies to be able to work with consumers and work with people that work in the industry to be able to help sell products. So there's many different related to that. So you can work from with farmers to consumers to be able to do that. And one of the things that I think is important, there's many different jobs in extension and working with farmers. Here at the University of Minnesota, we have small farms team that work from related to food systems, livestock, to agronomy that work with those type farmers. There's organic food systems in extension, working with consumers on those aspects. And really, I think one of the things that I stressed about is really working with farmers is an important aspect with that as well. So there's many, like I said, if you're interested, you can find jobs. Organic Valley has, I think there was 100 or more jobs on their website. This morning when I looked, if you're interested in working in an organic cooperative from many different aspects that might be important. So there's lots of jobs out there to being able to do this and work with those different companies. So what about some of my students and former students, and what have they done? They've done organic projects, come to graduate school, got their master's degrees in organic and sustainable ag. So what sort of jobs have they been able to find? Well, one is a agriculture teacher, teaches sustainable ag in California, and working with high school students and looking at those aspects and really teaching the youth about organic and sustainable ag in many of those different aspects. One of them is executive director of Minnesota Milk Producers, so works with farmers and legislators and works a lot in policy. And he did a lot of the outwintering studies that we showed from an organic situation. So being able to understand different production systems also maybe helps him work with legislators and the public and in many different aspects. You can work for one student works now for the Minnesota Board of Animal Health, so looking at animal health related aspects in her job. And one is a research technician with Zinpro Corporation, so works in their nutritional division and working with farmers and doing some research studies on farms, albeit in the conventional world, but she was trained in grazing-based research and nutrition, and is working for a nutrition company in those aspects. So it's very important. And two others are working in genetics for ABS Global and working with embryos and such in those capacities. So there's many different jobs related to that. I don't necessarily think there's just because you have an organic master's degree or PhD doesn't mean that you can't work for many different corporations or groups or government groups or things like that. So there's many different opportunities involved with that as well. And a few things. So working with farmers is important from my point of view, being able to work with this. This is our group, Chad Deckow at Penn State and a few other Penn State grad students, and my grad students were on some farms in Wisconsin this past year. So being able to work on projects with farmers, so we do projects on these farmers' farms, and being able to go to these farms and talk with this organic farmer, stand out his pasture, understand what he does, is very important, and being able to understand the relationship that they have between the cows and the grass and the land. So there's many learning opportunities, and I would urge you to certainly explore some of those as well. We do many different field days and workshops for our extension program. So this is myself doing an outwintering workshop. So we do some workshops in the winter time when it's nice and not maybe so much snow. So showing them what we do in a research capacity, and then in the summer having pasture walks. So pasture walks are, I would say, an essential part to an extension program, and being an extension educator and working with some of these farmers, getting out in the pasture, showing them the grass, showing them the different things is all important. And that's really how a lot of the farmers learn. That's, if you survey them, this is one of, this is really how they learn different things. So is standing out in a pasture. And so that is very important to working with some of these organic producers that we have, is being able to show them things and being able to have them learn. And last is 4-H. So I think the 4-H youth are very important in a sustainable ag, organic career, or whatever career you might be working in an extension. Obviously, these youth are our future. So I've helped with our local 4-H program and the state 4-H programs, and getting these students involved in dairy production. And some of the things you can see where they've talked about what milk is and what dairy products are at our state fair. We've hosted a breakfast on the farm, trying to get people to think about dairy and really looking at more consumer-based education in dairy production. And then at our county fair, we have our 4-H youth are dairy ambassadors. So we work with the dairy ambassador program and show the public how we milk cows and really what that aspect is from milk to consumer. So getting the youth to think about this from an early age is very fun to be able to work with those and teach those young kids about dairy production. So that can be pretty important as well in any sort of thing, but really working with extension and being able to teach youth about dairy and working with calves is a great way of working with these youth and being able to get them excited in the dairy industry, and because these are really our future leaders that we might have. So in the end, and in kind of closing, there's many different aspects. So there's many different careers, jobs. If you look for the rainbow there, you can see that there's many different aspects to that. And I think that really there's a lot of opportunities in careers in organics, and being able to think about that and trying to think about jobs. It's a little bit different. There's many different aspects. You have to be able to think differently and think about how everything interacts. But in the end, I think there's many different jobs and many opportunities for people if they have an interest in agriculture and organic agriculture, especially because it brings a new perspective into those aspects. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And feel free, if you want to contact me, know more information about stuff, feel free to let me know. And if you ever have any interest in coming to see us here, you can do that too. So thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Heins. For those who don't know me, my name is Bethany Dado-Sen, and I'm on the ADSA Graduate Student Division Board. So I would just like to say on behalf of the board and all of the members of the GSD, thank you so much for your time. It was very, very informative, and we already do have one question. So if you do have questions, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom, and I will read them aloud for everyone to hear. So Gilberto Solano is a second-year MS candidate in the Dairy Systems Lab at Colorado State University. They'd like to know, could you please talk more about the management of antibiotics and maybe NSAIDs or hormones at the organic farms in Europe?
That's a great question. So in management, well, I should say that we can use some steroid hormones here in the U.S. So we can use flunixin or banamine to help alleviate pain. So that, pain mitigation is allowed on organics here in the U.S. So that's one thing. And then the antibiotics and hormones are not allowed. But in Europe, they can use antibiotics. So they don't use them probably very often. So in Europe, it's a little bit different. So if you administer antibiotics to an animal, a veterinarian has to do it. So you have to have a veterinarian come out. They have to have extensive paperwork done just to treat an animal. So it can be very different in the US, where we might be used to treating an animal and without having to call a veterinarian. But being said, if you have to treat an animal, they are allowed to be treated for antibiotics, and you may have to double the withdrawal time on that or wait a couple weeks, and then the animal can actually be deemed organic again once she is past a certain point or an extended point on their drug withdrawal. So it can be very different in Europe, and that would not be allowed in the US. So it can be very different, some of those aspects.
All right, thank you. One question I have for you specifically, you kind of talked about some of your students who were in the organic and sustainable program and took jobs more in the conventional setting. Yes. But from the other end of the spectrum, if you are a student who is trained in more of a conventional management program, yes, what are some steps you might take to train yourself if you would decide to go into an organic type career?
Okay, well, that's an excellent question. So, it sort of, a little bit, it follows some of the things that I did. So I was trained more conventional standpoint. When I finished grad school, organic was gaining in popularity, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. So some of the things I think you can do is going to some organic conferences. There are many organic conferences in many states. Minnesota has some, Wisconsin does. Many different states have organic conferences that have people, farmers as well as researchers, come in. So some of these conferences can be very different. There can be farmer-led sessions to research-based ones. So being able to go to those conferences, and they start out from beginning aspects of organic to some that are more have been involved in organics for a long time. So there's a wide range of things there, and really, going to some of these pasture walks, learning about other organic farmers. Obviously there's lots of stuff on the internet that you can look at learning about organics, but I think those are some of the things, is getting out there and seeing some of these farms and learning more about what these farmers are doing is probably the most important thing that I would recommend in doing if you're interested in doing more organic stuff.
Thank you. All right, the questions are piling in. So the next question is, how would you compare organic with conventional farming in terms of environmental sustainability?
Oh, that's a good question. That one's, yes, very, very interesting. I think you have to determine what environmental sustainability really is. And looking at those aspects, I think, a lot of conventional farms can be very sustainable and have manure management plans and be very in tune to the environment and different things like that. I think it's a different aspect when you think about it from a grazing standpoint. You have to look at it from a land base. These cattle are on the land. There might be water close by. So there's different aspects that you have considering environment in a organic herd versus a sort of conventional freestall based herd. And I think, yeah, there's many different things. There's pluses and minuses to both from an environmental standpoint. And but I think, that's one thing that we're trying to do is work with both types of farms to improve their environmental footprint to being able to do that.
Awesome, great answer. The next question is, the pastures in Minnesota look great. Do you have any special management for them?
Actually, management is not too special. I'm a firm believer in using the cattle on the land to be able to improve them. So we practice management intensive grazing. So we have our animals in a small paddock so they're able to eat grass and then distribute manure and urine across that pack more efficiently. So practicing really rotational grazing and not coming back to the same paddock for maybe 30 days. And hopefully we get some rain, and some farms use irrigation to be able to get good grass out of their pastures. We don't have any irrigation, so we're very dependent on the weather. But I think a lot of how our pastures look good are really intensive grazing and not just turning cows out. So it takes more work and more labor to be able to do that, but I think that's an important aspect.
Very good. The next question is from one of your students, Miss Glenda. She asks, if you were not working in academia, what would you be doing currently?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I think I would be working in the dairy industry in some aspects. I still like the genetics. I've always had the thought of dairy farming myself. Although, if I were to think about doing that today, it might not be such a good option with some of the low prices. But that was my goal when I got my bachelor's degree, was to milk cows. When I was getting my undergraduate degree, I had no aspirations of getting a PhD or anything like that, or being a faculty member. So going through a lot of the experiences that I've had as a graduate student and working with many different farmers sort of led me to the career that I have today. So you never know what you might get into just by the experiences that you have. So I think I would still be involved in the dairy industry and maybe doing some of the physical work. But I'm faculty supervisor of the dairy here at University of Minnesota, so I get to work with cows every day too. So, but I think, yeah, you never know where your career choice might lead you, because this is definitely not what I had in mind when I started graduate school.
I think that's a very important and inspiring point for a lot of our students. There's still, looks like we have another question. There's still some time for questions, so feel free to type those in if you have any. Let's see. How factable do you see is it to inquire from Europe to the organic dairy systems in the U.S.? Okay, so how easy is it to transfer some of the practices that we see in Europe to our U.S. system of organics?
That's a good question. That came up for debate. So I spoke at a cattle congress in Denmark, and I spoke on organic production systems there. And that was one of the questions that some of those people had as well, as how, will we see some of those practices? Frankly, I don't see the United States organic industry moving to allowing antibiotics in organic herds. I think that's one of the important aspects of our organic system that won't change. So I don't foresee that happening anytime soon. There are some other practices that we may see related to animal welfare standpoint, from housing standpoints that we see. You know, when I was in Denmark, an interesting aspect, in 5 years, tie stall barns will be banned from use. And there are a lot of organic herds in the United States that still use tie stall barns. So we may have to look at different ways to adopt certain practices. You know, there's a lot of a growing practice in organics looking at polled genetics. So polled cattle not having horns, and trying to work through different ways there with breeding or different health standards to being able to work with those animals. So there are things I think we can learn from Europe and then being able to adapt those to our systems. But the antibiotic one I don't see changing at all.
All right, great question. I will ask one more question, and if we get no other questions, we'll go ahead and end. But if you do have any further questions, those who are listening in, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. But a question I have, and perhaps even Glenda or Kirsten, who I also saw is listening in, could type an answer here too. But from a student perspective, what do you think is some of the most valuable experiences you've been able to provide to your students to prepare them for a career in the dairy industry?
Well, I think if you ask them, they might give you the same answer. I think I like my students to get experiences outside of just sitting in an office all day. So I think being able to work with the cattle here at our research center has been good. So being able to physically work with the animals and understand that, and understand the production system. Also, going to different meetings where there's farmers. You know, they've come with me to meetings to meet with farmers and understand what's happening in the real world as well. And a few of them have had the opportunity to go to international travel with me. We went to a conference. Glenda and Hannah went to an international conference on precision technology 3 years ago in the Netherlands. So being able to experience some of those aspects has probably been a good thing as well. We meet people from all over the world, and when we were there, we started some new collaborations with some technology. So you never know where those experiences might lead you. So I think it's important to being able to go to different conferences and learning from other people and seeing what's out there is, I think, very valuable. There's lots of good things that happen in a classroom, and you need to get your work done, but I think there's good learning experiences outside of that as well.
I definitely agree, especially with your point on networking leading to collaboration, which is very, very valuable as an academic member. Your students answered that they enjoyed the hands-on everything and the involvement in 4-H that allows them to get involved with working with younger children. So both very good answers. I think with that, if there are no other questions, feel free to type them in quick if you have any. If not, again, I would just like to thank you, Dr. Heins, for your time, and to all of you panelists. Thank you for asking some awesome questions. We have some thanks from the crowd too, thanking you for your time. As he said, his email and phone number are placed above if you do have any further questions. If not, feel free to email anyone on the GSD board, and we can pass the question along, or even message us on our Facebook group. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Heins. We learned a lot from you today, and hope you have a very enjoyable week.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.